Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, American Society Council of the Americas, for inviting me to moderate this panel with such distinguished participants. Thank you very much. I think we all know that investing in infrastructure is a good thing. McKinsey has published a study where it states that investing in infrastructure has a rate of return of 20%. This means that there is a productivity boost over the long term of around 20% in the economy. So when we take that to Brazil, catching up with the infrastructure over the next decade, this could mean that we would have an additional 1.5% of the GDP only by investing in infrastructure and the shortcomings that we have had in the past. Of course, also, investing in infrastructure also means jobs, job creation during the construction time, during the operating time. Now, if Brazil would invest 1% more of the GDP over the next decade, we would be talking about 1.3 million jobs generated during this time. And we know how dearly Brazil needs these job creations. Also, another number from 2008 to 2013, Brazil has invested around 2.5% in infrastructure. There is a general wisdom that number should be north of 4%, especially in cases of countries like Brazil, where infrastructure is rather poor. So, when a country like Brazil is currently facing problems or restrictions on expenditures, so what does it take to attract the private sector or for investments? When we're talking about the private sector, of course, we should remember that they both work, on the one hand, as sponsor of projects, but also as the financing arm of those projects. It's not a very difficult undertaking. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's rather a simple recipe. We need three aspects. We need to have well-structured and well-planned projects. We need to make those projects bankable, and we need to offer investors with an adequate risk-adjusted return for those projects. Remember that well-structured projects take time, so quick solutions often have a bad end. This sounds familiar with certain recent projects in Brazil, especially when we look at that tariffs that have been forced to be maintained at low levels. Another discussion we just heard Mendonça talking about PPPs. Our experience globally has been that PPPs should be used in those cases where the project will become cheaper to operate and to maintain than a pure public investment, and not necessarily ideological choices. Also, one last comment that I would have before we start discussing those aspects with my colleagues here is that we should use scarce public resources to in the financing of these projects, exactly where the market is not able to offer a market-conform solution. We are talking about, in the case of Brazil, on long-term financing and offering hedges for certain projects. So, and if we use wisely those scarce resources of the public sector, we would be able to have lower tariffs. This means productivity gains, and at the end, economic growth. And I have also been asked to adjust our panel time to the schedule. We're a little bit behind schedule, so let's go straight to the questions. And I'll start with you, Donna. When everybody sees your resume, we see that you have traveled a lot. You have a lot of experience with several economies. And what would you say when you're comparing airports globally? What would you say is the main difference between airports globally and the airports in Brazil? And taking into consideration that in Brazil we have very different standards. We have Guarulhos, which is a relatively modern airport. We have airports that have just been auctioned, which are still very weak.
Thank you, Rafael. Unfortunately, airport infrastructure is deficient throughout the Latin America region, and the amount of activity in airport construction and design that's ongoing is lowest in this region of any place in the world. There's a company called Skymark that annually conducts a survey of passengers to rank the best airports in the world. And on the list of top 100 airports, the first airport from Latin America appears only at position number 42. That's Bogota. There are 3 other airports from Latin America on that list. None of them is from Brazil. Now, this has an impact beyond the national pride of being able to say we're number 1, right? The World Economic Forum surveys the travel and tourism industry on a biannual basis. And they rank countries according to their attractiveness for tourism. And we all know tourism is a really important sector. It's often provides the entry-level jobs for lower and lower middle classes. So on the survey of 141 countries, Brazil comes in at position number 28, which is respectable for tourism, except that for natural resources, Brazil ranks number 1. For attractiveness of culture, Brazil ranks 3. None of those are surprising to any of us who live in Brazil. What pulls Brazil down to the position of 28 is airport infrastructure, position 112. One interesting point is that the number 1 airport, again in 2017, as it has been for the last 5 years, is Changi, Singapore. And Singapore Changi is the concessionaire for the airport in Rio, for Galeão. So you've got a concessionaire in Rio that knows how to run the best airport in the world. All you have to do now is make sure it has the conditions to be able to use the skills and the experience it has. We know that Galeão has improved a lot in the last 2 or 3 years or so. Way to go yet, but I think the potential there is tremendous.
Yeah, that's very good news indeed. Rogerio, now, what are the challenges that GE faces with the Brazilian infrastructure? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What can you tell us?
Okay, Rafael, I think GE has been playing in the Brazil infrastructure market for almost 100 years, and in several different sectors, right? We go all the way from the aviation to mining, transportation, healthcare. Specifically on the oil and gas sector, the company has invested a lot in the last few years, and investments were made along the areas of increasing local capacity, increasing the ability to produce equipment locally, to provide services locally, but also and fundamentally investments in productivity and efficiency. And that's where we think the biggest opportunities and challenges are, right? As we look at the investment capabilities of companies in general, of oil producers in general, they are going through a cycle where they have to optimize the existing resources. So when we look at investments that could not only generate extra capacity, but at the same time do that at a lower cost, at a faster pace, this is exactly where we think the opportunities are. Through the discussions of this morning, and you mentioned a few of those in your opening remarks, I think we do face, the market of oil and gas faces some challenges with regards to the very same topics. We talk about the institutional stability, availability of financing, longer-term financing. It was mentioned many times, the complexity of the operational environment, and I think these are, only to name a few of the challenges that are on the table for our major customers and also for us as we look at continuing the investments and strengthening the position in Brazil.
Thank you. Bernard, now the AES Corporation is present in 17 countries around the world. So what is the experience of the corporation regarding projects in energy generation, and when you compare that to Brazil, what are the main challenges that the corporation sees?
I think when we look, let's put Brazil and the energy matrix as well as Latin America that is very reliable on hydro. And when you are very reliable on hydro as the source of the energy, that created the energy matrix or the energy system is not resilient. When you have intermittencies in inflows or when you have actually phenomena like La Niña or El Niño. So one of the aspects that we see across the Latin America is actually how we can actually introduce investments that make the energy matrix and the system at the grid resilient to those effects. We have done that in Panama with the investment of generation and LNG facilities, and we're doing that here in Brazil. We have AES-Tietê. We are targeting an AES-Tietê in order to have about 50% of our EBITDA by 2020 should come from renewables, either wind or solar, or should come from the gas thermal generation. That in that aspect make resilience our portfolio in Brazil, but also help to make resilience the system in Brazil. And you see that across the board. The other interesting that is happening across Latin America is the renewable penetration. Renewable penetration is not anymore a climate solution impact, it's also a cost economic impact. Actually compete in fairly basis with any thermal, coal, gas, and wind and renewable could compete by itself or actually together, depend of what is the load in each of the markets.
Okay. Rogerio, and what's the experience of GE when you're talking about Latin America? You have this region that you oversee. So what are the main challenges that you're seeing, similar to Bernard, what the challenge was, and what are the ways to overcome those challenges in infrastructure in Latin America?
Okay. I think when we look at the the future of the oil and gas business and the challenges ahead of us, we mentioned a few of those on the operating environment. I think that's where most of the challenges are relative to where investment is made. I would point at two things. I made reference to productivity at the beginning, but there is a whole infrastructure that needs to be established behind that to allow the investments in productivity. And to name a few, we go through logistics. It's extremely important. As we look at the telecommunications capabilities, I will use an example. Today, when we have an equipment operating in a platform, outside in the ocean, a lot of those equipments, those machines, they are monitored. They are remotely monitored. A way of reducing cost today is making sure that you understand the behavior of the equipment and you're actually doing maintenance or you're doing intervention on equipment as needed and not based on the time and everything else. All of these things, to be efficient, they require a strong communication infrastructure behind it. And also the logistics is also a critical element, right? We're moving parts from manufacturing sites in Brazil, from manufacturing sites in other places, and we don't want to see an equipment out of service. That's a huge cost. So the ability to predict when a failure will occur depends on the infrastructure, the telecommunications infrastructure, the ability to operate in an equipment, the ability to go to an offshore platform and do a replacement, do a service, depends a lot on the logistics that goes all the way from the complexity of importing, keeping inventory, and moving parts through the whole process. So those are some of the elements, and I stress these points because they are around the concept of productivity, efficiency, and cost reduction, which I strongly believe is it's what's going to help the industry to make a better use of the limited resources today.
Okay. Donna, you mentioned Brazilian infrastructure in airports, which is not necessarily a business card for Brazil, from the numbers we have heard from you. However, last week we just had the auction of 4 airports in Brazil, which, as the minister mentioned, attracted 3 international operators. Is this more a consequence of those operators having limited expansion capacity in their home markets, or is it a consequence that investing in airport is an interesting and viable investment?
So last week's auction was not the first successful auction of airports in Brazil, but I think it was the first realistically successful auction. Their minimum bids required were reasonable, so that the premiums paid were premiums that were within the realm of possibility of the concessionaires to meet. The amount of investment required was also in line with the expansion in passenger and cargo service expected at those airports. And that gets back to having enough time to study the data before you have to submit your bid. the externalities of these investments, I think, were very positive. And Minister Moreira Franco mentioned the importance of not having to take the government as a partner. We all know that the government partner in other concessions has been problematic. And one condition he didn't mention was that the bidders were allowed to take, if you will, more than one airport, as long as they weren't in the same region. So the fact that Frankfurt could be the winner in Fortaleza and Porto Alegre allows that company to get synergies from their Brazil operation that might not be available otherwise. I do think it's fair to say to the last point on your question that we all know that it's difficult to expand or build new airports in a lot of jurisdictions. We see how hard it's been for Heathrow to get approval for a new runway. The last big airport construction in the United States was Denver, and that's, 25 years ago now. So I think it's clear that the successful operators from around the world are looking at new opportunities, and certainly Brazil offers those.
Yeah. Okay. Now you mentioned about government participation. And in the case of Brazil, we do have the government still very active in the air traffic, be it because Infraero controls the largest number of airports, no longer the most important ones, but the largest numbers. We have air traffic control, which is a state, is not a private sector, is a public. We have the limitation on the participation of foreign investors in air companies. So tell us the differences to the developed markets and how it impacts private investment in Brazilian infrastructure.
Yeah, I think the difference is in whether you think you need to protect your domestic industry, your domestic airlines, or whether you need to create the conditions so that they can be more competitive globally. One of the situations we see here in Brazil is that around the world, fuel costs generally account for somewhere between 33-35% of operating costs of an airline. In Brazil, they reach between 40 and 42% of operating costs because taxes on aviation fuel are so high. Airlines have spent a lot of time over the last couple of years going state to state begging for reductions in ICMS, right? Some of the states have responded. Brasilia responded very well to that. Others have not so much. The result is that you have inefficient operations where airlines are tanking fuel to be able to buy it in a state where ICMS is lower and operate in states where that cost would be higher. So looking at things like open skies that would provide your airlines the opportunity to expand their routes. If your airlines are competitive, they're going to welcome the open skies. The government, I think, clearly has a role in something as important as aviation. We're talking major safety regulatory issues. But the private sector should be allowed to run its own airlines.
Yeah, I think to paraphrase maybe Mr. Maggi, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, when he was talking about privatization or the sale of land to foreigners, it's that they're not taking the land away. I think the same thing. Foreign companies, airlines, would not take the passengers away from Brazil. The passenger would still stay here, which is really the important thing to have better services.
And if you recognize the value of your domestic aviation industry to your economy.
Yeah, very good. Bernard, coming back to you, what is the strategy for AES in terms of developing greenfield generation projects in general? And has the focus in the case of Brazil shifted away from distribution? What can you tell us in that sense? And is the distribution market no longer attractive? And if yes, what are the reasons?
Okay. Well, let me start for the distribution first. In the distribution first, we have not shifted from the distribution. We're looking to rebalance our portfolio in Brazil, in the distribution in Hydropower specifically. All of our focus is creating and recovering the value of the distribution after the draw in the 2014, 2015, and also in order to actually provide the quality of service, reach the quality of service that is needed for the customers. In the ES7, that is the generation side, that is the hydrology, we are actually in this moment looking for development and acquisitions in Bahia for renewables in wind. We actually are in greenfield, in solar, in the state of Sao Paulo, that we prepare actually for the auction that was canceled in December 2016, and we still believe that is a good project to pursue. We are looking at acquisition in solar as well, and we are developing in generation gas thermal for the state of Sao Paulo. That is where we are when we look at the strategy and what we are looking as a growth, and that is actually in process as we speak at this moment, and part of the team is here with me in the Council of America. The other thing in order to make that happen, in the greenfield spectrums, that we would like to see are things like a more embraced project finance, a long-term PPA that could be indexed to either currency, inflation, or dollar in order to provide project finance for international multilaterals that not be only relying on BNDES, in this case in Brazil. The other thing is the environmental permits. The environmental permits are a little bit cumbersome, take a little bit of time. We have seen a lot of progress in the latest projects that we have actually working on developing here in Brazil. Lastly, and I think it is important, is with all the car wash case. There is many of these projects that has been canceled or delayed. Some of those are really interesting and actually attractive for investors. And I think that we need to think through what is the way that an acquisition could happen with a proper due diligence that made the new acquirer not be liable to either a link to the construction or the project sponsor that is actually a target for that acquisition. If that actually could happen, that actually could be a good step in order to embrace not foreign investor but existing investor in Brazil in order to take over for some of the projects that are actually interested and attractive in the market.
When you mention about environmental issues and the difficulty in getting those licenses, on the other hand, we also have the construction companies, the largest construction companies in Brazil, which have traditionally been the ones that have been able or that have executed these projects. So you have, on the one hand, these companies which are struggling, and the other hand, the environmental issues. Does that mean in the case of Brazil that the times of the era of the large hydropower plants are gone and we are not going to see those anymore?
I don't think that the era has passed. I think Brazil is the largest market in Latin America. It's a market to be in, have their fluctuations, have their cycles, and we're coming out for like a valley of the cycle, and things are actually coming up. Yesterday, Minister of Finance was mentioning about the leading indicators that are improving. We in our Hydropower and ETT business, when we follow the demand, we actually have observed also an uptick in the demand compared to the same period of last year. So we are confident that this actually will smooth along. Relate to the EPC contractors, yes, there were many players, Brazilian players, that actually is an accent for what is proper in order to create jobs, what is proper in order to create construction, and I think create an opportunity to a competitive market between national players and actually foreign players that could come in, and trying to actually, I think for international players to come in, that we would like to see is more stable currency, more stable interest rate, and with these two, and the demand, and I think the projects are there, and that could be actually create a good balancing between local champions and foreign investors in Brazil.
Yeah. Okay. Rogerio, Bernard just mentioned a couple of challenges on the macroeconomic side, and how on the oil sector, how do you see the infrastructure market adapting to the new reality of the economic challenges that Brazil is facing?
Okay. I think, Rafael, some of the same conditions apply. I would talk specifically about the financing. It's one of the areas that we've been talking about a lot. Some of these projects, I think I would separate in two areas. One is financing for the oil exploration and production projects, and also financing for the supply chain structure. And new players are coming in, new business models. There was a reference earlier today about companies like us, like multinational companies, playing a stronger role in financing operations. So new business models, we talked about the conversion of CapEx to OpEx as one of the ways to motivate additional investments. So that's a methodology in which we enter with a stronger financial position And we do the capital expenditure, and we convert that into a rate. So that helps on the financing side. Is a way of adapting to the new conditions. These new business models will play a stronger role. And when we connect it back to the supply chain, it's also important that we strengthen the relationships to assure the continuity of the local capabilities. These are two elements. The ability to, I thought it was extremely interesting in the healthcare industry, doing things that we do in the energy sector, which is charge for the upside, right? We enter together in a project. It could be an existing project. To make an example, if you go to a mature oil field, there's an oil field that's operating today. It operates at a certain volume, operates at a certain cost, and we come together with the customer and we design a project to either improve production or reduce cost, and we don't actually get paid until they capture that upside. So these are alternatives that the company is looking at, alternatives that we're developing with the customers to make the investments still viable while the cycle gets adapted.
Very good. Well, we all know that Boeing is a leading technology company, is also a leading aircraft manufacturer. So, and what is the changes that Boeing is seeing on the new aircraft types, and what will be the demands that this will bring to airports? Or are we all going to see, Captain Kirk's teletransports in the future?
We had an executive at Boeing who retired just a few years ago who liked to say, airplanes are awesome and flying sucks. So what we're trying to do is make flying suck less, or as to say it more formally, improve the passenger experience. And that means we don't just have to listen to our clients, we have to listen to our clients' clients, right? Because we're B2B, we sell aircraft to companies. One of the things we've done is in Sao Paulo, which is, by the way, one of only 2 places in the world where this can be done, because at USP they have the proper facilities, is to do passenger comfort studies as we think about new airplane designs. What are passengers looking for in their new aircraft? Now, we don't make the seats, right, as I explained endlessly. We don't determine the pitch of the seats in an aircraft. But there are things the aircraft manufacturer can do to make the experience more pleasant. One is noise control. If you've been on the 787, the Dreamliner, you would know that it's a much quieter aircraft than most of them. We can control temperature ranges, so it's not always just too hot or too cold. So that's one thing we're doing to address the aircraft. But we also have to look at the other parts of the aviation ecosystem. We have to look at airspace, we have to look at the airline and the airport. Airspace, if you have flown on the Ponte Aéreo between Sao Paulo and Rio over the last several months, you might notice that your trip is a little shorter. That's thanks to some software that we in our customer goal were able to develop to cut time off of that trip by improving the way the plane is flown. We work very closely with our customers on the range of issues, including reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. The industry has very ambitious targets in 2020 and then in 2050 to reduce their carbon emissions. We're working with them on alternative fuels, as well as with GE on how to improve the engines on the aircraft. And then we're working with airports. One of the best airports in the world, many of you may have been there, is Incheon in Seoul, Korea. That airport gets 65% of its revenue from non-aeronautical sources. It gets it from a hotel, gets it from shopping facilities, it gets it from good restaurants. So looking at the airports of the future, airports that could themselves become destinations.
Yeah, very interesting. When we are talking about technology, Bernard, we know that AES is a leader in energy storage. Can you explain us this technology, or is actually AES already developing, technology to storage wind, as one of our former presidents wanted to have?
Yeah, well, energy storage is something that we are really proud of. Yes, we are leading in the market in energy storage in a scale grid. We have energy storage in 7 countries right now in operation. We have more than 200 megawatts installed and operate. We have like 400 in development. And we recently actually sold and operate and maintenance in California. The largest that is in operation right now worldwide, that is 40 megawatts. We also are bringing that technology here in Brazil. Hopefully, by the end of this month, Italo, we should have in operation the first energy storage here in Brazil, in Bariri. And we're working closely with the government also in order to have about 57 megawatts energy storage in order to solve the problem of electricity transmission between Venezuela and Roraima and here in Brazil. This is an story that started actually back in 2008 when a few talent people from AES started working on it to how ensemble and make an integration solution about how to batteries, models, software, and actually storage the energy. And that evolved, that first operation that we did was in Chile, in the north of Chile, 2008. That is 20 megawatts that is installed there. And that has been proved in economic, have been proved in resilience, have been proved in quality. It's still in operation and we're still making money on it. And so it's a proof concept. It's not really a new thing in AES. It's a new thing in the market. And I think the market is moving pretty fast on that. Countries like UK and in Europe and state in California and United States are actually leading in this moment the implementation of the energy storage. Energy storage as an integrated solution could actually compete with peak plants, depend on the number of hours, frequency regulation, balancing for renewable penetration, a complement for a 24-hour cycle for solar or wind, since solar not the 24 hours and wind doesn't blow all the time consistently. And transmission constraint. So we have 4 of these concepts already out there in operation, and it's moving along pretty good. And it's a competitive market as well. So it's a new scheme for being the utility sector where the competition is totally different to be actually in the market and with this product. But it has been an amazing journey so far.
Rogerio, since we are talking about infrastructure, technological innovations, in the case of oil and gas, what are the new technologies that will shape the infrastructure market, or what are the new developments?
Okay. I think from a technological perspective, I mentioned the digital industrial applications. This is going to change the industry as we talk about the economic environment in which the industries are in. We look at oil prices fluctuations. There is one conclusion that all of our customers came, which is they need to modernize operations. They need to be more cost effective. And I think all the different applications, the subsea applications, the power generation applications for platforms, they all benefit a lot from the newer digital industrial technologies. This has been an area where we're investing heavily in connecting the equipment technology, in connecting the equipment intelligence to the planning in general for cost purposes, for reliability purposes. I would say this is number one in terms of actual technological development. And the second, the business models, as we talked about. I would like to add one element that was touched many times. We look at the regulatory environment.
Yes.
To make sure that the rules and the regulations are clear. As we develop the new technologies, as we develop the new operating models for our customers, it's important that they understand that these investments are being made in an environment that's clear for the long term, right? They understand what the implications of more efficient equipment, of lower fuel consumptions, all of these things will play in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, we are talking about infrastructure, we are talking about 30 years, we are talking about 7 governments. So the idea has to be, it's not a government program, it's a state program. It's Brazil's program, and we have to abide to rules for 20, 30 years and not change them according to the government. Now, maybe one last question for all of you is we see BNDES now changing its financing model. It's going to be more adapted to market conditions. This will put more of a burden or need for the capital markets to finance infrastructure in Brazil. Do you have comments? Do you see that there could be a development of the capital markets, a deeper development of capital markets for infrastructure in Brazil? Maybe Donna, if you would like to start.
Yeah, well, I think all of what we've heard today and what the finance minister said last night creates the confidence where those capital markets could develop. I think the question becomes one of consistency, making sure that if it's even slow growth, it's steady growth, that the policies are consistent, that the regulatory environment makes sense. If all of those conditions are in place, then I think capital markets are going to go where they're going to make money, right? And they'll respond.
I totally agree. It's a consistent regulatory body. Doesn't matter that it's a slow growth. Is that provide stability and that provide clarity and a protection of a private investment? I think that will be just fine.
I would only add that the regulations, the consistency is extremely important, and we add to that there'll be a matrix of a financing for the new projects, right? A combination of ECAs like BNDES continues to be extremely important, but that will be combined with private investments, suppliers investments, and other methodologies that will have to come into play.
Well, thank you, Rogerio. Thank you, Bernard. Thank you very much, Donna. And thank you for listening to us. Thank you very much.
Yeah.